Hello, my name is Tom, and today I'm going to show you how to set up an employee in Xero accounting. First of all, before you set up a payroll employee in Xero, you need to ensure you have payroll administration access to the file. The subscriber of the file can grant this access to your user. If you cannot see the payroll button on the blue tab at the top of Xero, then you currently do not have payroll administration access. To add an employee, you go Payroll and Employees, and you select New Employee and add an employee. Importantly, before you set up an employee, it is highly recommended that you ensure you have a completed tax file declaration form and a completed superannuation choice form, but completed by the employee, to use those details for the correct setup into the file. We're going to assume today that we have both of those things, and we are going to add the employee now. So today we are going to add Bob, so Mr. Robert Smith. His date of birth will be the 15th of February 1984. His title is accountant. We select his gender, male. His address, this will search from the white pages. Mobile phone number, his email address. Now the email address is quite important because once an employee is set up and you're preparing payroll, throughout that process you are going to want to email payslips to your staff, and this is where the software will pull the email address from, so making sure that's in there is quite important. They may also have emergency contacts, which you should include here in case anyone ever needs to access that. Emails if you wanted to, but you're probably not contacting someone via email in the event of an emergency. So now that we've got basic information in, we'll hit save. This creates the employee as a very standard point in the file and allows us to then go and add further detail, because as you can see, all these additional tabs have been created. So what we will now do is we'll work our way through these tabs. So we will go to the employment tab. Again, the tax file declaration form will be important for filling these out, as well as the super choice form. So we are setting up an employee. They are on salary and wages, and that will be the case for virtually all employees unless they are a working holiday maker, which is on a specialised visa to Australia, or if it's a director or a very closely held person to the owners of the business. But for the most part, everyone will be salary and wages. The employment basis, whether they're part-time or full-time, part-time or casual. In this scenario, we're going to say that Bob is full-time and that he starts on today's date. Classification of award, don't need to have that information in there, but obviously it is always important to ensure that you are checking which award is applicable to your business, and that your employees' pay rates and allocation under the award is correct to ensure you're not in breach of any employment conditions. The next one is your pay calendar. This should default automatically. So if your payroll is already set up, it will default very much like this has to a weekly calendar, okay? Or a fortnightly if you're a fortnightly calendar. Employee groups are used when you have different sorts of tracking groups within Xero. In our scenario, we're not going to worry too much about that. Another handy one to select is what state they're going to be employed in. So we're going to select Victoria. And the reason we do that is because Xero will recognize days that are public holidays within the pay cycle, and specifically list them in the payroll or in the pay run, so that they can see that they've been paid for having Queen's birthday off or Christmas Day off. And if you tick this button, it'll actually show on the payslip, as I just said. The next section is their earnings. Now, every employee earns ordinary hours of earnings, and that will be the default drop-down, which you should select. Authorizing leave, that's really for a payroll administrator, so we can leave that out. And then you need to add their super fund. So this is where having the superannuation choice form completed is handy, because the employee then elects where their super needs to be directed to when you're paying it. So we click add a superannuation fund, we select the drop down. The demo already has HESTA set up. I'll show you how you can add additional super funds should your employee be with another superannuation fund. But the superannuation, for our purposes, let's talk that HESTA was the super fund that the employee wanted. So we're going to select HESTA, and we're going to put their member number in and hit save. Okay, so we've now entered all of the basic employment details, of which some of this will have come from the tax declaration form and superannuation choice form. We'll hit save there just to make sure that that is all in. We then go to the taxes tab. Here we'll enter their tax file number, click whether they're an Australian or a foreign resident. 99.9% of the time they will be an Australian resident if you're employing in Australia, but if not and they're a foreign resident, you have that to select. But we would also recommend having a discussion with your accountant to ensure that the taxes are treated correctly if they are a foreign resident. Has an approved withholding variation is not very common at all, and not something to worry too much about in the setup unless specifically mentioned by the employee. The tax scale will always be the regular tax scale unless specifically notified by the employee. On the tax declaration form, they will also notify you whether they do or do not want to claim the tax-free threshold, and it's important to make sure you either tick if they are or untick if they are not claiming the tax-free threshold. Again, these items are all listed on the tax declaration form filled out by the employee, so you just simply need to adhere to what they've directed you to do on that tax declaration form. Leave loading, subject to your award. You may be required to pay leave loading to your employees, and if you are, you just need to ensure you tick that. And we hit save. Now, obviously my tax file number is not a true tax file number, so we're just going to try and make up one that might work. No. So what we will do for our demo is we will just say under 18, which means at this stage we're not required to have a TFN. That's now saved. In the event we were happy that all of this information was correct and accurate as per the document supplied by the employee, we could save and file this now to the ATO, which is an important requirement that's required if you do have a new employee start with you. Once we're happy that the taxes tab is correct, we can go to the leave tab, and as we said before, he is going to be a full-time employee. So what we are going to do is assign the default leave types, which will be annual leave and sick leave or personal leave for a full-time employee. Importantly, you do need to click into each of these and make sure the hours are correct. So for annual leave, it is based on ordinary hours of earnings. Hours of leave accrued annually by a full-time employee. So on this scenario, the employee works a 38-hour week. Every employee is entitled to 4 weeks annual leave accrued a year, which equates to 152 hours. If they worked a 40-hour week, they're entitled to 160 hours of leave, being 4 weeks of 40 hours. So hours of leave accrued annually by a full-time employee, in our scenario being 38 hours a week, is 152, and the hours that they work per week is 38 hours. Annual leave is always paid out to the employee if they're terminated. And we save that. With the personal leave, same scenario, but an employee is entitled to 10 days or 2 weeks of personal leave. If they're working 38 hours a week, that's 76 hours a year they accrue. If it's a 40-hour week, they're entitled to 80 hours a year of sick leave. Importantly though, on termination this is not paid out. And we hit save. By having those set up in the leave section, it does mean that when we process a each pay cycle, it will accrue and calculate the appropriate leave entitlement for them. Now that that is complete, we can go across to the bank account details. This section's handy if you're using an ABA file to upload multiple pays to your bank so you can pay it as one transaction. And in here you need to put the details of what you want to appear for the bank transaction when you're paying the staff. So here we're going to say Bob wages, and it's Robert Smith is the bank account name, the BSB, and we hit save. By putting the data in there, it means if you are using an ABA file to pay your employees, because you have lots of employees, then the data will produce from what we've just created here. Not a common thing for people to use, but really handy if you have 10 plus employees to pay each week. Pay slips, we don't really need to do anything here, and this is because this is just where all historical pay slips are kept so that you can access them and supply them to the staff member if they ever request them. The next tab is pay templates. In here, you set up a standard pay for your employees. So if you have an employee working full time, they do their normal hours every week, chances are their pay is going to be the same each and every week. And what that means is if we set it up as a template here, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and effort. Each pay, instead of having to manually type it in, it'll just default as a standard setup, which you can adjust, but save a lot of time if you don't need to adjust. So all employees, as I said, earn ordinary hours, so we need to come in here and we need to select ordinary hours and go OK. If we set that this person, that Bob does 38 hours a week and he's paid $40 an hour, it'll then default every week with that as the calculation for his wage. We can then also, it's important and a legal requirement that every employee earns superannuation on their wage, so we need to add a super line, and we're selecting super guarantee contribution and we're hitting OK. What this means is the standard pay will come in, the standard superannuation calculation will also come in, and because they are the very basic standard things we have, that's all we need to add to this pay template. Often though, you will have allowances that you have for employees and you probably pay them on a weekly basis as well. To add one of them, you've got to go to add an earnings line and you can select the certain type of allowance you want to have as a standard in there. Now we'll just pretend this allowance is relevant. We're going to have it as enter a rate. Okay, so you can then manually put in what you need to there. So he gets one allowance a day, 5 days a week, and it's $10. So he gets his $50 allowance. We will show you in another video how to add an allowance or a pay item that is more specific. So please keep a lookout for that video. For our purposes today, we're going to keep it very standard there and hit save. Opening balances really aren't of relevance to anything for you. So you can pretty much disregard that, and if you do have any concerns about this tab, please chat to your accountant. The final tab is the Notes tab. This is a really handy tab to keep records of the employee. Now, we all like to think we have the perfect employees, but often you do need to discuss difficult things with them where you're providing a verbal warning, a written warning, or you've addressed an issue with them, or it might be just something as simple as it's his birthday on the 15th of February and we need to remember that. It's a great place to template and time record discussions that you've had with employees, which is then useful documentary evidence for you in the event that you ever need to call on that. So a nice little handy tab to have, not needed ongoing unless you need to keep those sort of special notes for that specific employee. Okay, so now that we've added all of these items from details all the way through to notes, this employee is now set up, ready to have a payroll processed. So if you recall, we did set him up as a weekly employee. So if we were to now go payroll, pay employees, and I'm just going to get rid of this, add a pay run. You will now see that Robert's in there, and if you remember, I said by setting up that pay template you'd get a standard pay calculation. So if we click in here, we can see that standard pay. We can add an allowance or an earning line or a bonus, whatever we sort of want in there, which again we'll show you how to create in another video. But you'll see that it creates the standard pay, it calculates the tax, it calculates the super, his net pay, as well as it calculates leave accrual that he gets from working the hours he did during the week. That is how we set up an employee into Xero. A reminder, it is really crucial to make sure you have your tax file declaration completed by the employee, their superannuation choice form completed, as well as reviewing the award to make sure which award they're covered under, their classification, and their appropriate pay rates before you set up an employee. If you'd like detailed training on Xero, or you'd just like a better business accountant, then please contact Jeffkins Accountancy and Business Solutions. Thank you.